Alrighty, you're here to learn how to do a groove weld, or also known as like an AWS certification test. We're gonna do ours on 1/2 inch plate today. A lot of people do theirs on either 3/8 plate or 1 inch plate, but our welding inspector likes to do it on a 1/2 inch plate because he can do a side bend instead of a face and a root bend, and it's just a lot easier for him to do. So we do ours on 1/2 inch. The things you're gonna need are, first, your PPE, which includes a helmet with a brand new lens. Brand new inside and out. If you can't see, you can't weld. So when you're doing the certification, it's really hard to see these grooves, especially the cover pass. It's hard to see like the edges. So it's really important you have to have a clean lens. So you need that. You could either use a face shield or put your helmet in grind mode. I'm gonna use a face shield so I can see better. We've got a grinder. We have a hard disc, a nice new flap disc, and a wire wheel. Quality pair of welding pliers. 3 clamps of your choosing. It doesn't hurt to have a weld gauge because not everybody's micrometer is calibrated. Then your technical documentation. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do is read my documentation. All right, it's GMAW, that's important to know. Our joint configuration, it's got a 1/4 inch backing, 45-degree included angle, not 45 degrees on each plate, the included angle. We're doing A36 material. Let's see our weld settings. ER70S-6, 035 wire diameter, 9010 argon CO2, at 20 to 30 cubic feet an hour. Our voltage range is pretty big on this one. Anywhere from 17 to 28 volts and 200 to 480 inches a minute on the wire. I am going to set mine all the way up to 480 and then probably around 26 volts. I like a shorter arc length. That's super important, especially on the cover pass, to not get undercut. I'm gonna start by prepping my plates. It is super important, since this is gonna be a destructive test, that we grind all the mill scale. It's really super important on any weld, but for this one especially, if you don't normally grind your mill scale, do it. So we're gonna do the whole backing bar, anywhere we're gonna weld. So we're gonna do the backing bar. We're gonna grind the mill scale off the front of the plate, about a 1/2 inch back. We're gonna grind the mill scale off the back of the plate, just an 1/8 inch or so, because we're only gonna barely burn into this edge. So we just wanna burn in, or grind where we're gonna burn into. So 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch back, not a big deal. And then we're gonna take our flap disc and we're gonna get all these saw marks out of this plate. Alrighty, so I got them ground. I'm gonna give you a little peek at them. Got this ground here. I've got all the saw marks. Got it ground back here. Now it's super important to not have any deep gouges. For one, deep gouges on the face, you could fail visual. Definitely some certified welding inspectors will fail you for grinder marks. So make sure you have a nice smooth finish. And we don't want saw marks, not because the CWI will fail you, but if you have deep saw marks, it could cause like an occlusion or a lack of fusion, and then that could be bad. Your destructive test could go boink and break. So we got the back, we got the face of the bevel, we got the front, that's on both pieces, and then we've got the backing bar where it's nice and smooth too. No deep gouges or anything, and no mill scale. The first thing you need is a smooth surface to work on. You want to make sure you grind or scrape off any spatter on the table. If you're working in a welding booth that the table has been ground a lot and the table is not flat, then you might want to try clear to one edge or the other, because that's normally the flattest part of the table. The next step is to clamp one piece on the table upside down. Remember, upside down is very important. After that, you want to put your other plate on the table upside down. Make sure both plates are upside down. That's very important. You will use your backing bar as a spacer, clamp the second piece down, pull the backing bar out, use your micrometer to center the backing bar, or use layout lines. That's probably the better of the two options. And then clamp the backing bar in place. After your pieces are clamped, you're going to put one tack on each corner of the backing bar. Only put one tack at each corner. After it's tacked, you will remove the clamps and check to make sure there's no gaps between the backing bar on the plate, make sure your 1/4 inch root opening is perfect and that your backing bar is straight. Only after you've checked that thoroughly, then you will put a 1-inch weld on each side of the backing bar in the middle, and then clear on the outsides, you're going to put a 1/2 inch weld. Do not make it any more than a 1/2 inch, and make sure it is clear to the outsides. Okie dokie, so you saw me double check that my fit up was good after I only had a tack on each corner. It is not a good idea to weld this thing real good, then flip it over and see how you did, because I've seen it quite often that people don't get this fit up quite right. Weld it real good and then they got to start over. So things that are super important is that your plates, your bevels, your beveled pieces are flush against your backing bar. That means tight, no gaps. That can really get you in big trouble if you have gaps between there. You want to make sure your 1/4 inch root opening is good. And when we flip it over to the back, we see we got a little bit bigger stitch welds holding it together. And I make sure they're only about a 1/2 inch on the top and bottom, or right and left side, whatever. And then like an inch in the middle, because our destructive test is going to come right out of here and here. And I don't want to weld that backing bar on where we're going to do our destructive test. Alrighty, so before we get to welding, let's talk a little about bead sequence. Bead sequence is a pretty big deal. I always say that the difference between a welder and a good welder is the good welder uses his brain. The welder, maybe not. So bead sequence is huge. It's like playing chess. You got to think like 3 steps ahead. And guess what? When it comes to the bead sequence on this, there's only 4 steps. So I'm going to start out by pointing out the 3/8. The 3/8 plate is a lot easier to get a nice bead sequence, if you ask me. You just do your root pass, which ties in your 2 bevels and your backing bar. And then you do 2 for the hot pass, and like 3 for the cover pass, bada boom, bada bang. It's that easy. But then we move over to the 1/2 inch. The 1/2 inch bead sequence is a little bit different. You still do your root pass. You got to make sure you tie in that little corner, and your backing bar all at the same time. And then the hot pass, that's where it gets a little funny, a little weird. It's pretty tight down there still for a guy like me. If you do a nice fat root, maybe it'd be okay. A nice fat root might not be necessarily good, but it might not be bad. So what I do like average size root. And then what I like to do 2 little beads for my hot pass, but 1 bigger bead with maybe needs a little manipulation of your wire, but not a lot, because you don't want to do a lot. Just a little bit bigger bead, a little bit slower bead to fill that in. When I do my demonstration, I'm going to do half 1 big bead, half 2 little beads. And then we get to this pass, boom, 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 probably about 3 beads. Then the cover pass, mine normally ends up about 4 beads. Your goal, you're thinking ahead. Remember, we're using our brain, we're using our noggin, we are good welders. So after these 2 passes, I've got to decide how tall I'm going to make those beads, how I'm going to stack those beads in order to make this cover pass not too low, not too high. It's got to be at least flush, which means to the top of the plates, and not higher than 1/8 of an inch. So I like this pass here, my red pass, I like it to be within like a 1/16 inch of that corner, an 1/8 inch at most. I like a little bit smaller beads than most people, so 1/8 inch might be fine for you. I wouldn't go any more than 1/8 because there's a good chance you will not get it full or something bad will happen. So I do my root pass. I do the hot pass, either 1 or 2 beads, depending on how the root pass happens. You don't always necessarily have to do it the same every time, because things happen and you got to use your noggin, you got to think, and you might have to adapt a little bit to the situation. So 1 or 2 beads there, 3-ish beads there, and we're making sure we get within a 1/16 inch of that corner, that edge of the surface, whatever you want to call it. And then for the cover pass, I like to point my wire right there at that toe, and I like to come over almost an 1/8 inch on this top. And the first bead, I'm not really worried about the size. Second, third, and last bead, I kind of, I'm thinking about how big these beads have to be in order to make this, this right here. Let's just imagine this is gone. to make this right here so my wire can get down and it can tie all 3 of these pieces together. So I need about an 1/8 inch right there showing so I don't get an occlusion or lack of fusion. And then I'll do my last bead, letting it overlap an 1/8 of an inch or so, and it's perfect every time. Never fails. So anyway, let's head over to the welder and we'll do some welding. So before I weld, I'm gonna tell you one more thing. This backing bar, this is the secret. You're gonna start your weld all the way out here on the end, just like you're gonna be welding, same speed, everything. Nice and smooth, nice and slow, and then weld all the way to this end. That's super important, don't forget. All right, for the root pass, this is your root pass. Your electrode angle. Your travel angle is gonna be about like that in the direction of travel, somewhere like this, in there. Work angle, which is this way. Our work angle, straight up and down. I hope you can see that, my markers are dying. Straight up and down. Alrighty, I've got the first pass done. Let it cool down a little bit. As you can see here, look at it from the side. That's one secret. Always look at the side profile of your bead after every bead. That way you can kind of get an idea of what you need to do next. What I'm going to do next is I am going to do the second half first, and that's called backstepping. If you do a weld and then weld into it, it's called backstepping. I'm going to do the second half with one big bead, and then I'm going to start on the first half using 2 smaller beads. There's one secret. I am gonna build up this backing bar just a little bit on each side. That way my whole backing bar is as high as this next pass, so I don't have to go uphill at the beginning and downhill at the end. I'm gonna just build it up like zap, 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 build it up, or just put little beads. It don't matter, it's just gotta be built up. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna zap, 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 zap. Big bead on this half, 2 smaller beads on this half. All right, if you're gonna do the 2 little beads for the hot pass, your work angle, you're gonna point towards that toe of that weld, and you're gonna let it overlap all but about an 1/8 inch of that bead. For the next bead of the hot pass, you're gonna point straight up and down, pointing right at that previous bead to make sure you tie in your plate and your bead on the hot pass along with your root pass. It all ties in. All right, got the hot pass in. See, this way I welded first. That is the one bigger bead, which I feel like is okay. I think it got burned in pretty good. I just had to weld a little slower than I like. But then this side, I did 2 beads. Got basically the exact same result with 2 fast beads, but they were a little faster than I liked. So that's why I don't necessarily like this 1/2 inch, is because like one way is a little too slow on this pass, one way is a little too fast. Not a big deal. Obviously, I could do both, and you can do both too. So now I'm looking at it from the side, and I'm seeing I've got to get my next pass up almost all the way to that edge, that little corner there, about a 1/16 under. So that's going to take me 3 average size beads for me to get across there. Okie dokie, now this filler pass. This first bead, obviously, same travel angle. Do not pull, always push. We're doing spray transfer, so you always push. All right, we're just gonna point right at the toe of that weld, let that fill in. Just a decent bead. Like I said, you can either do 2 bigger beads or 3 smaller beads. So this first bead, your angle is gonna be the same. You're gonna be making sure you get tied into this plate, this bead down here, and then this bead over here. Get them all 3 tied in. All right, so I got that welded, let it cool down a little bit. Now I'm gonna show you. All right, this looked a little worse before I got looking at it close. Right here I had a little bit of a wiggle, and it's, I don't know, a little less than an 1/8 inch down from the top. The rest of it's right about a 1/16 inch from that top, which is right where I want it. And if you look down the edge like that, got a fuzzy. So if you look down the edge from the end, I'm gonna have to put a real small bead. I'm gonna overlap this one over halfway, almost all the way, just to keep everything nice and level. I'm gonna leave about a 1/16 of that bead showing over here. That way my next bead can be a nice fast one, filling this up all the way, almost to the top, but not quite. If you're doing the 3 bead method, you're gonna have that same angle right there, tying in this bead, the bead of your previous bead. Tie all those in together. All right, so I got that next one in there. I got it. It's right about a 1/16 under flush still. And I got that nice little spot to fill. So what I'm gonna do, overlap this middle bead halfway or more, then just come up right to that edge. This is gonna be a quick bead. I didn't leave much room, but it'll be okay. I didn't get myself pinched off that got tied in. There's no lack of fusion, no cold lap or overlap. So I'll just be able to put a nice fast bead in there, call it good. If I would have welded that first one a little slower, I almost could have done it in 2 big beads, but I don't like doing that because I feel like I end up getting like overlap or some kind of lack of fusion. So that's why I like smaller beads. So anyway, I'm gonna get this one welded, let you check it out. So I got that. This one was a little hard. It's been a while since I've done this, probably a year since I've done this. I probably should have practiced before the video, but where would the fun be in that? So I probably could have got away with 2 big beads, but I don't like doing that. So I did 3 little beads and I got that nice and full. So now what I'm gonna do, after it's cooled all the way down, before this cover pass needs to be cooled all the way down. The other passes, you can pretty much put them in nice and hot, but this cover pass, you gotta let it cool down so you don't get undercut. 1G is not as bad as other positions, but 1G you can still get undercut, just not quite as easy as like horizontal. Horizontal is really hard. So I'm gonna let it overlap this edge just a little bit, 1/8 inch at the most. And then I'm gonna weld probably my next 2 beads, and then I'm gonna let it cool all the way down again and do the last bead. That last bead is one that's very important that you let it cool all the way down again. All right, we're gonna get to it. Alrighty, so now I'm ready for the cover pass. You noticed before I let it cool, I let this cool down to where I can like touch it with my hand. I don't recommend touching hot metal with your hand. You can use the temple sticks that are like 150-degree temple stick, or maybe one of those laser guns, or like some kind of device that you can tell the temperature. What's that called? Put it in the comments. All right, so alrighty, so I left about 1/16 of an inch from this corner here to that filler pass. So now my angle isn't gonna be quite as steep as it was for this first bead. It's gonna be a little more straight up and down. And that first bead, I'm gonna let overlap about an 1/8 inch and then make sure it builds up nice and good. So that one's gonna be just like that. Next one, we're gonna point right at the toe. Are you seeing a theme here? First bead, the next bead, the next bead, the next bead, the next bead. No matter how many beads are in a row, they're always gonna have just about that same angle. And then you get to the last bead, and it's gonna be straight up and down, just like that root pass. So, we're gonna point at that toe, we're gonna fill that in, and then imagine that this is about 1/8 of an inch here. Print not to scale. So we're gonna point straight up and down. We're gonna overlap this halfway, come over halfway here, bada boom, bada bing, it's perfect. See that right there? I've got it, I'll measure it for you, but it's like, I'd say it's 30 seconds of an inch above flush, which is good. I always look at it from the end, because if it's barely above flush, I'll stack my next bead way high to build it up. Or if it's like way high, my next bead I'll do a little lower to make it not as high. The amount you overlap definitely affects how high your cover pass is gonna end up being. So let's just measure this real quick. It's right at about 1/16 of an inch, so that's fine. So that means I can be 1/16 inch higher than that and not be too high. So I'm just gonna overlap a little over halfway like I always do. Then I'll check it again, then we'll do it again, then we'll do the last bead after it cools. All right, so I got started on that bead and I made a game time decision that I could not fit 4 beads in that top. So, the way the beads just happened to stack up, the previous layer was close enough to the top and the first bead was high enough that I could put 1 bead in there, which I'm sure a lot of people could do it that way, you know, like 1 bead, 2 bead, 3 beads, and it'd be good. Normally when I do this, it ends up being more beads than that, like 1, 2, 3, 4. But today it's gonna be 1 or 2. I probably could have done 2 or 3, and I did 3. Now I'm gonna do 3. It's like I said, it's not always the same. This one turned out this way. That's why you always have to pay attention. You have to look from the side each bead. If you have real measuring devices, use them. Use them every bead if you want. It's too much knowledge is never a bad thing. So anyway, now I'm just gonna fill that in, overlap that about halfway or a little over, come over here about 1/8 inch past the groove, bada boom, bada bing, it will be done. Alrighty, that worked out really well. I don't know why I ever said it'll take 4 beads to fill that in. Look at this thing. The highest point I could find with my fancy gauge here, it's the GAL Gauge Co. Bridge Cam gauge. I am not affiliated with them whatever. It's just the one I have. But look at that. About 3/32 of an inch is the highest spot it is on the cover. There's absolutely nothing too low. It's nice and pretty, no excessive spatter, like no undercut, nothing. This is like what we want. So it might not be what we tried to do, but it still came out gosh dang good. That's why you got to know your objective, and you might have to change your plans as you go. That's the difference between a welder and a good welder. Like I literally changed my plans as I was welding that second bead on the cover pass. It's just, I was like, boy, I was wrong. So then I just, boom, made a little adjustment and it came out perfectly. So next thing we're gonna do, we're gonna cut our strips and we're gonna prep them up. We're gonna grind them up, polish them up, not polish, but grind them up, sand them up, and then we're gonna bend them and see if they bend. In order to get our side bend specimen, we need to cut the outside inch off of each side of the plate. We then come in 3/8 of an inch off of each side and cut our specimens from there. In this step, we remove the backing bar, grind off the weld on the root and the face. We polish all 4 sides and slightly radius the corners. Alrighty, I got them all prepped up, ready for the bending apparatus. We're gonna head back there and see how she bends. Alrighty, would you look at that? Bent just fine. Boom. Alrighty, I hope you learned from this. I'll see you next time.